Everyone already knows about the classic prisoner's dilemma problem. Two accomplices in a crime get caught while pulling some heist. They are brought to separate rooms and offered a plea deal, something along these lines. On the grounds of inconclusive evidence, each prisoner is offered the choice to turn in their partner for a reduced sentence. However, if both prisoners think selfishly, they both end up with a worse outcome than if they had both stayed silent. The reason this thought experiment works so well is because of the assumption of self-interest. Of course, it is incredibly accurate to say that at least 99% of people would probably prefer less jail time to more, and you'd be hard-pressed to find two individuals so loyal that they could be confident the other person wouldn't sell them out. But what if we took a different perspective? What if the people in the dilemma wanted to cooperate, but their actions to cooperate made it more unlikely that they would succeed? The following problem is a rehash from the popular political website 538. It turns out they offer more than electoral statistics. Imagine Alice and Bob are locked in a dungeon by an evil king who fears perfect logicians. However, due to protests from people in the land, the king offers them a game to earn their freedom. Here are the rules. Each of them will be provided a fair coin to aid in their decision. They can either choose to take the coin and flip it once, or they can choose not to flip the coin. They will both be freed if and only if every single coin that was chosen to be flipped comes up heads. This means if both of them choose to flip the coin, then both of their tosses must come up heads. If one of them chooses not to flip the coin while the other does, then it is the singular coin toss that decides their fate. However, if neither of them chooses to flip the coin, then they both remain locked away forever. Alice and Bob are explained the rules by the prison guards at the same time, and they're given no means to communicate or decide on any strategy together. To aid their decision, suppose Alice and Bob are given a random number generator that spits out a value between 0 and 1 inclusive. If you watched my last video on how you can simulate a computer's data with any coin, fair or not, you might recognize that technically the coin itself could be a means to generate a random number as well. However, for the sake of not confusing RNG coin flips with the actual decision-making process itself, let's just assume that they had a random number generator at their disposal. The question becomes this: what is the optimal move for Alice and Bob to maximize their chances at freedom? To me, the reason why this problem is interesting is because it almost seems like a reversed version of the prisoner's dilemma. Naively, the decision to flip the coin actually decreases the odds of escape, assuming the other person chose to flip. In addition, the format of this puzzle forces at least one of them to flip to avoid eternal imprisonment, so it feels like both of them should always have the incentive to choose to flip. For those that say otherwise, you have to remember that a chance of escape probably sounds very appealing when faced with being locked away forever. So while not a perfect replica of the original prisoner's dilemma, it is still a problem that necessitates a solution. What should the strategy be for Alice and Bob? The answer, you might reasonably expect, lies in the random number generator that they're given. It should be relatively obvious that the prisoners must have some amount of decision making to do, since choosing to flip 100% of the time caps the freedom percentage at 25, while choosing never to flip caps it at 0. Since Alice and Bob are perfect logicians, they both would realize that trying to metagame what the other person is thinking is impossible, and thus would come to the conclusion that both of them must adopt the same prior strategy regardless of what the other person does. Here, this means choosing to flip the coin with probability p. Mathematically, we can use the law of total probability. A quick explanation to anyone who hasn't seen my Mafia video: the law of total probability states that the probability of an event A can be found by summing the probabilities of A occurring across all possible mutually exclusive subscenarios, bi, weighted by the probability of each exclusive subscenario. Mathematically, it's expressed as the probability of A equals the sum of all I of the probability of A given bi times bi, where the bi's themselves form a partition of the sample space. Here, the event we care about is a successful escape S, while the subscenarios that we can partition around are the number of people who ended up flipping the coin F. We'll define Fi, where I equals 0, 1, or 2, as the number of people who chose to flip a coin. Then we have the following equation. We can already plug in our values for conditional probabilities since we just covered those a few minutes ago. Then we can use the fact that Alice and Bob are separated and unable to communicate, meaning that the chance they pick the coin is independent. Using the multiplication rule, this means the probability of f of 0 equals 1 minus p squared. The probability of f of 1 is equal to p times 1 minus p plus 1 minus p times p, where the first term represents Alice choosing to flip and Bob abstaining, and the second term represents the opposite scenario. Lastly, the probability of f2 is just p squared. Then, our overall equation simplifies to p minus 3/4 p squared. To optimize for the highest probability of success, we can observe that this expression is concave down based on the negative coefficient of the polynomial, so the first derivative test will provide a maxima. Taking the first derivative itself and setting it to 0, we get 1 minus 3/2 p squared equals 0, or just p equals 2/3. To summarize, both Alice and Bob should flip the coin if the random number generator returns a value in the bottom 2/3 of its feasible outputs. This means the probability of escape is p of s equals 2/3 minus 3/4 times 2/3 squared, which is equal to 1/3. Meanwhile, we can see that if they weren't given a method of randomizing their decision-making process and just decided to choose to flip with 50% probability, then their probability of success is p of s equals 1/2 minus 3/4 times 1/2 squared, which is equal to 5/16. This is about about a 2% optimization, but with a lifetime of imprisonment possible, every optimization counts. Besides, in the real world, you often deal with way more than just 2 people at a time. Suppose instead of just Alice and Bob, there are actually Alice and Bob and Charlie and Dave and Eve and so on. In fact, every logician in the land has been imprisoned by the evil king. However, the rules now stay the same. Each logician is given the option to flip the coin, but every coin that is flipped must be heads for all of them to be released. More mathematically, with some generalized n amount of people, where we assume n is very large, what is the ideal probability threshold p that maximizes the chance of everyone escaping, where p is the probability of choosing to flip the coin? This more generalized problem actually presents the reverse of the issue of the smaller case. In the original problem, Alice and Bob are seemingly psychologically incentivized to flip, since the chance that the other person abstains is relatively high. In this scenario, the chance of at least one other person flipping is basically guaranteed, which actually creates a bystander effect. If these weren't perfect logicians, there could be a feasible scenario where, with a large enough sample size, no one would choose to flip out of risk of being that one person who spoiled everything else for the rest of the crowd. Fortunately, we love talking about optimizations on this channel. See if you can solve the problem at hand. Feel free to pause the video and come back when you're finished. Or, you're more than welcome to keep watching for the solution. Ready? Let's go. We can use the same logic process from the smaller problem by using LOTP and conditioning on how many people choose to flip a coin. With n people imprisoned, this means that up to n people could have flipped the coin. Here's the equation as previously described. For any generic p of s given fk, this value must be equal to 1 over 2 to the power of k, since all k people that chose to flip must come up heads. The more interesting question is what the probability of k people choosing to flip is if each person chooses to flip a coin independently with probability p. This pattern matches to the definition of the binomial distribution. The binomial distribution models the number of occurrences in n independent Bernoulli trials, each with a probability p of success. Here, an occurrence is when someone decides to flip the coin. It uses the probability mass function here. For anyone confused about the notation, we can quickly go over the variables. N is just the total number of trials, or in this case, the total number of prisoners. X is a random variable here representing the total number of people who chose to flip the coin. We're seeing the probability of exactly k number of people choosing to flip a coin, where k is some integer between 0 and n inclusive. The large parenthesis sign on the right hand side of the equation is actually the combination sign, and that signals n factorial divided by k factorial times n minus k factorial, which represents the number of ways to pick k people out of n prisoners. It is commonly read as n choose k. Plugging these values back into our function, we get the following result. Note that the index of the summation starts at 1 here, since we're dropping the degenerate case where no one chooses to flip, which is a guaranteed failure. This simplifies to 1 minus 0.5 p all to the power of n minus 1 minus p all to the power of n. That last step finds its derivation in the binomial theorem. For the sake of video length, I'll flash the formula for the binomial theorem on the screen now. If enough people are curious about it in the comments, I might make a follow-up video on that topic in the future. Note that since n here is a constant, this function is really only constrained by one variable, which is p, the probability threshold. Once again, we turn to the first derivative test. Here we get n times 1 minus p all to the power of n minus 1 minus 0.5n times 1 minus 0.5p all to the power of n minus 1 equals 0. To spare the algebra, this simplifies to the expression shown on the screen as follows. As a sanity check, if we plug in n equals 2 into this expression, we get the value of 0.5 over 0.75, which is equal to 2/3, the same answer as we got before. Now we just have to plug this crazy expression back into the original problem to get the prior value of success given an optimal strategy for n prisoners. But here's actually the coolest part. As n, the number of prisoners, approaches infinity, this entire function actually approaches 0.25. This means it doesn't actually matter how many logicians the king locks up. The logicians are guaranteed to have at least a 25% chance of escaping, assuming everyone plays optimally. The math is a little complicated behind the justification behind this, but if anyone wants to give it a shot in the comments, a hint is to use the logarithmic expressions of 2. You can also get a pretty good approximation using big O notation. If you end up with the fact that the expected number of people who actually flip a coin is around 1.386 for large n, you should be correct. I know this video was primarily focused around this one problem, but take a minute to really think about the implications with me. Typically, most people view decision-making processes as inherently deterministic. Sure, every individual might have different weights to assign to various criteria that they deem important, but at the end of the day, almost everyone looks back on the decisions they've made in the past and acknowledges that if put in the same situation with the exact same information, the outcome likely wouldn't have changed. And yet, counterintuitively, it appears we've manufactured a situation where being unpredictable is by far the best strategy. If you got even 100 people to play this game who didn't view the random number generator as essential, the probability that they would ever escape, even after thousands of rounds, would probably still be 0. And these situations are not as rare as you might believe. Coaches in professional sports often create trick plays. In machine learning models like a random forest, you randomly pick a group of predictors which averages out to get a better outcome in the long run. Even market makers often throw in randomization here and there to throw off their competitors who try to analyze their trading strategies. Overall, this reverse prisoner's dilemma, while not necessarily an exact parallel, still shares the central theme of the original. An absence of certainty makes self-interest undercut cooperation. In a purely deterministic worldview with no acknowledgement of randomization, the odds of hurting yourself dramatically increases. Ironically enough, maybe sometimes the best plan is to not know what your plan is after all. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. It's actually so wild to me that in just a week I'm at 100 subscribers, or at least at the point of recording this voiceover. This YouTube thing is very new to me, so thanks so much for all your feedback, especially in that Mafia video I made. Quickly on the subject, I just wanted to quickly clarify that the purpose of that video is just to establish a baseline strategy for how the game could be played, assuming there was no prior knowledge to begin with. Obviously in the long run there would be adaptations if the same set of players were playing. However, that sort of simulation is far beyond my abilities, and the video is just meant to be more introductory. I'd really appreciate any comments on this video for ideas or topics you'd like to see in the future. My general goal is to stick to things relating to probability and statistics, but I might branch out into tech as well. If you're interested in where I found this problem, feel free to check out the description for the 538 link. If you find my content interesting, please subscribe. It'd be amazing to have everyone along for this journey together. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.